Good afternoon, everyone. They tell me it should be good evening, but I have both here, so it depends on where you are. Hi, everyone. I am Heidi Holder, and I am the Frederick P. and Sandra P. Rose Chair of Education at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. On behalf of the museum, it is my distinct honor, and I really mean that, to welcome you to this exhibition preview conversation celebrating Superfine, Tailoring Black style, which opens at the museum on May the 10th. So you're all welcome on that day to please come on and have a look. We are thrilled to be hosting this talk in Harlem at the Apollo Stages at the Victoria Theater. I would like to extend a special thank you to the Apollo Education Department, especially co-directors Debbie Ademendo and David King, as well as the venue rental operations and licensing team for their tremendous support in bringing this program to life. We could not have done it without you. The Costume Institute's Spring 2025 exhibition, Superfine, Tailoring Black Style, presents a cultural and historical examination of the Black dandy. The exhibition is inspired by guest curator Monica L. Miller's 2009 book, Slaves to Fashion, Black Dandyism and the Styling of Black Diasporic Identity. It explores the significance of sartorial style in shaping Black identities within the Atlantic diaspora through a range of media, including garments and accessories, drawings, paintings, photography, film, excerpts, and more. The exhibition tells the story of the Black dandy over time and introduces new narratives that collectively describe the history of Black dandyism as a unique phenomenon reflecting broader issues of power and race within the Black diaspora. The education team at the Met has developed a robust suite of programs and activities for all ages to complement this exhibition to help people find meaning with what is on view. These includes talks. There will be fashion walking tours of Harlem. They sell out right away, so I'm just letting you know. Studio workshops, family afternoons, and this evening's preview conversation. Another conversation will also happen in Brooklyn at the Billie Holiday Theater at Restoration Plaza on April the 24th, so look out for that. Now, community is a vital part of our work at the Met, and we recognize that any discourse on Black style, representation, and culture requires us to engage with our friends and neighbors in Harlem, a place and a space that stands as a testament to creativity, resilience, and legacy. We are honored to be here in Harlem and to share this exhibition with you. As a quick reminder, you should have seen a QR code passing around at the welcome desk, and someone is passing it around, one of the ushers. And this is for you to scan if you'd like to add a question for tonight's panel after the conversation. We encourage you to submit your questions. Additionally, as a token of our appreciation, we have included family and friends passes in your Met gift bags. If you haven't seen those yet, they're under your chair. Well, I think you got them at the front. And we encourage you, those passes admit 1 + 4 people to come to the Met and check out this exhibition and to explore what the museum has to offer in its permanent collections, programs, and events. Now, I'm just the appetizer, all right? So, for the moment you've all been waiting for, it is my pleasure to introduce Met guest curator Monica L. Miller. She is a professor and chair of Africana Studies at Barnard College, Columbia University, and a scholar of contemporary African American and Afro-diasporic literature and cultural studies. Her book, Slaves to Fashion, Black Dandyism and the Styling of Black Diasporic Identity, which inspires Superfine, the exhibition, won the William Saunders Scarborough Prize for Outstanding Scholarly Study of Black American Literature or Culture from the Modern Language Association. And it was shortlisted for the Modernist Studies Association Book Prize. Now, thank you and enjoy the conversation. Let's welcome Monica.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for being here. Okay. I'm really delighted to be here to share this preview of Superfine with you and hopefully to get you excited to come to see the show and all of the other programming that Heidi mentioned is coming up. So what I want to do in the next, hopefully not 10 minutes, under that, is to give you a little bit of a sense of what the exhibition is about, and also its particular relevance to Harlem, to where we are now. And I'll get started so we can actually get to the panel, which I'm also extremely excited about. Oh, wait, go back. Thank you. Okay. In 1789, the formerly enslaved writer Olaudah Equiano published a memoir that recounted his remarkable life. Able to save enough money to purchase his freedom, on the eve of his emancipation, he wrote, "I laid out above 8 pounds of my money for a suit of superfine clothes to dance with at my freedom." Though he knew the word superfine as a finely woven wool, over 250 years later, we also now understand it as a particular mood and attitude related to feeling especially good, fantastic even, in clothes that profoundly express the self. Throughout the process of curating this exhibition, I have been thinking with Zora Neale Hurston, who also expressed this feeling in her 1928 essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me. She writes, "When I set my hat a certain angle and saunter down 7th Avenue, Harlem City, feeling as snooty as the lions of the 42nd Street Library, the cosmic Zora emerges." Wearing superfine and being superfine are in many ways the subject of this exhibition. How Harlem innovates and generates that feeling is the subject of tonight's gathering. Harlem was on my mind when I was writing my book and has been on my mind as we've been curating this exhibition. I had the privilege of having a fellowship at the Schomburg Library during the revision of my book. I have also, over many years, been teaching and writing about the Harlem Renaissance, and doing so particularly in collaboration with the National Black Theater, with Harlem Stage, and also with the Studio Museum in Harlem. These experiences have really changed, or did really change, the trajectory of my book, and have also influenced this exhibition. Tonight, I'd like to take a quick look at a few sections of the exhibition where Harlem's style features prominently. Superfine is organized into 12 sections, a structure inspired by yet another Zora Neale Hurston essay, 1934's Characteristics of Negro Expression. Superfine doesn't use her exact categories, but instead presents others that define but are not definitive of Black dandyism. So tonight we're going to look at respectability, juke, heritage, and cool. Yes, respectability. Black political and cultural leaders have long understood dress and grooming as tools of power, distinction, and respectability. In 1910, scholar and activist W.E.B. Du Bois moved from Atlanta to Harlem to become director of publicity and research for the NAACP. He was one of the best educated and best dressed men in the early 20th century. We see him here in Paris in 1900, where he traveled to present the Exhibit of American Negroes, which featured a portrait gallery including hundreds of images of Black folk and Black life that were designed to prove American fitness for citizenship, equal, and human rights. Oh, okay, never mind. Go one more. Can you go forward too? Perfect. These portraits, this is one of Du Bois's portraits from the 1900 exhibition, are similar to many that he would later publish as exemplars of Black success and striving in the crisis. So now we need to go back one. Excellent. For Du Bois, respectability was both personal and political. The image on the far right is a bill for bespoke clothing that he ordered in 1911 in London when he was organizing a Pan-African Congress there. He also patronized Brooks Brothers here in New York City, which is the letter in the middle of this slide. All the way on the other side is a laundry list from 1933, which shows him maintaining his wardrobe. Du Bois wanted, above everything else, to, quote, be treated as he was dressed, which is a line from one of his novels from 1928. In this section, we are also featuring this pastel portrait titled A College Lad, a portrait of Harold Jackman, an educator and model who was thought to be Harlem's most handsome man in the 1920s. Already a graduate of NYU and Columbia, so he was actually a college graduate, not a college lad. Jackson wears a classic three-piece suit here as he portrays an aspirational type. He was an important player on the Harlem cultural scene, a lifelong patron of the arts, and also poet Countee Cullen's life partner. Juke. In Juke, which is one of the only category that we preserve from Hurston's Characteristics of Negro Expression essay, in Juke we examine the dandiacal fashions associated with music and nightlife, in particular the zoot suit and the tuxedo. This image of a Harlem dandy is by Miguel Covarrubias, who documented and celebrated figures who came to define the Harlem Renaissance. This 1930 portrait emphasizes the exaggerated proportions of the subject's suit, cut in the latest style, the epitome of cool, seen all over Harlem's streets. Zoot suits required excess fabric, which was deemed wasteful in the run-up to World War II, to create the long jacket and voluminous trousers that ballooned when danced. Worn by hepcats like the young Malcolm X, who famously chronicles the purchase of his first zoot suit in his autobiography, and that particular scene is incredibly rendered, right, in Spike Lee's Malcolm X film. Many of you will remember that. These suits were part of a transgressive subculture of young people of color, outrageous enough to cause riots in Los Angeles. These are two zoots, one from around 1940. The one behind me here on this section, and this side is from the Costume Institute's collection. And the green one on the other side, you'll notice that it has smaller proportions, which means that it may have been worn by a woman. The Harlem scene came with its own sartorial and verbal and figurative vocabulary, as seen here in these hipster and jive dictionaries, one by the legendary Cotton Club entertainer Cab Calloway. Worn by the well-heeled and servants at fancy functions, as well as musicians and entertainers on stage, the tuxedo exudes a sexy, gender-expansive power that can be co-opted and restated. This is a still from Isaac Julian's 1989 film meditation on Langston Hughes, in which the tuxedo creates belonging amongst Harlem's queer subculture. Here we see blues legend Gladys Bentley, MC at 133rd Street's Clam House Club, among many other establishments, in her signature white tuxedo. And I think right now, if you're driving along 125th Street, there are these beautiful banners that celebrate queer Harlem icons, and I think Gladys is up there as one of them right now. Heritage. Fashion can also bridge gaps in African diasporic history. Clothing and dress can tell personal stories and explore familial lineages essential to building self-confidence and community. In this 1959 portrait of W.E. Du Bois and his granddaughter, taken right before he self-exiled to Ghana, we see something I often see on Harlem streets, a mashup or mix-up of African and Western dress, a visual representation of connection and communion important to people who live here. Black nationalist thought and style also has an origin point in this neighborhood. This 1967 portrait of Amiri Baraka celebrates his style and cool conviction of Black dignity and pride. Even fashion director, stylist, and author Andre Leon Talley felt and exhibited this pride, posing in an improvised African outfit as a graduate student at Brown University in this 1975 Polaroid. Later, when he reached the pinnacle of his career, he commissioned this caftan from Nigerian designer Patience Torlowe, a regal and elegant tribute to his ancestry. Cool features the way in which Black designers and wearers revolutionized fashion in the later part of the 20th century, creating an easeful Black dandyism based in more casual clothing, khaki, cardigans, tracksuits, and denim. In this section, we contrast two photographs, which epitomize the spectrum of fashion in this moment and the relationship between music and Black popular culture to this phenomenon of cool. This portrait is Art Kane's 1958 Harlem, a group portrait of jazz legends taken on 126th Street. And we contrast this with Gordon Parks' Great Day in Hip Hop from 1998, which is taken in the same place, which I'll show in a minute. Jazz legends like John Coltrane and Miles Davis changed the way that musicians and others dressed, as formality in both attitude and silhouette gave way to cool. This 2021 ensemble by Virgil Abloh for Louis Vuitton exemplifies this mid-century vibe, exquisitely styled and in luxe fabrics. This is Gordon Parks' celebration of hip-hop legends and their aesthetic as the next musical and style vanguard in his 1998 group portrait, clearly echoing the earlier portrait. Superfine would not be complete without showing and revering Dapper Dan. This 1987 jacket was worn by Jam Master Jay. Dapper Dan's work as a stylist and designer defined the hip-hop era. He is a legend and style ambassador for Harlem today. Finally, I wanted to also talk about the tracksuit, which in this moment, right, really becomes in some ways the new three-piece suit. And we can see this excellently shown by Jamil Shabazz. And then also rendered, right, in this contemporary version as a homage to this time period by Grace Wells Bonner in this ensemble from the summer of 2021. So that is a preview of Superfine. And now I would like you to help me welcome to the stage my interlocutors from tonight. We have three beautiful people here with us tonight. We have many beautiful people here with us tonight, but let me just say, there are three of them who are going to be on the stage with me in just a minute. And I'm just going to say a little bit about how I know them, right? And I think they're ready to come on. So we want to welcome Miss Lana Turner, Harlem fashion icon, cultural historian, and somebody who I've been thinking about and writing about for many years, Lana. We also want to welcome Dandy Wellington, right, who reminded me just a few days ago that we met maybe about 10 years ago, right, and who, again, has been a part of my imagination since then and maybe before. And then finally, I'd like to welcome Jonathan McCrory from the National Black Theater, who has also been a longtime collaborator of mine, both here in Harlem and also in other lands and places. So here we are. Thank you very much.
Let's hear from Monica Miller, please. Yeah.
Do I need to turn it on? Let's look at it. Hello? Oh, no. There we go. Okay, excellent. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hi. Hi. So we've just seen just a little bit, right, about Black style and its relationship to Harlem. And full disclosure, we had a little conversation. We've had many conversations, actually, before we came out to join you all today. So some of the questions that I have are based on, or some of the conversation that we want to have tonight is based on a previous conversation, but in the best way. So I want to start talking about, in some ways, the biggest topic, Harlem style, right? And this question comes from something that Dandy mentioned. He said, how does Harlem speak to you? So I want to ask you all, how does Harlem speak to you, high level, right? And what is iconic for you in terms of Harlem style? We're looking at you, Lana.
They are looking at me. Oh, okay.
Yes, we're looking at you.
Of course.
So let's see. Your first question,
Yes, how does Harlem speak to you?
How does it speak to me? Well, the thing about place is also about soul. And it's also about spirit. And somehow you cannot, or I cannot, divorce myself from what the soul and spirit of Harlem has embedded in its history. I think about when I see people walk down the street. You know, there's a guy who I think I would just call him Muscle Man. And if you live in Harlem, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. He feels it's important to exercise, hanging on to the walk and don't walk signs on 125th Street.
Yes.
There is something about Muscle Man that I like. First of all, he epitomizes, perhaps not in terms of style, but in terms of spirit, what one does to show off one's body. And he does not do that in anonymity. He actually chooses Lenox Avenue at 125th Street to do this. So it's going to be the crossroads of culture, and everyone's going to notice. Spirit and soul. I think about what I know about old Harlem. So they have me here because I talk about old things, people.
We have you here for a lot of different reasons.
I like history, though. And so there are many things. There are parades that are in the street. You know, one of the parades that I love is the African American Day Parade in September. And why do I like it? Because the parade is both in the street and with the onlookers. If you've never had fun like I have fun, come with me. There are many things in the street that talk about Harlem's life, blood, and its history, though people don't always look as attired as Dandy anymore. He is so special. But every now and then, there is the glimmer. Every now and then, there is someone who shows up and shows out.
Shows out, exactly.
And everyone turns around and they want to know, who are you?
Right.
Because you are what historically people know in their DNA. So that's what it means.
Amazing.
I mean, everything that you said, plus the thing about Harlem is that, yes, everyone is showing out in their own way, and it may be just a small way, it may be a little pin, it may just be their stature, their ancestry, you know, the pride of just being amongst their own people. Harlem is a special place because, I mean, they don't write all these songs about Harlem for no reason. You know, throughout the jazz age and all up into hip hop.
Right.
There is always a song about Harlem because it is black culture incarnate. It is where the hoi polloi are us and we. It's culture.
I mean, what makes 125th Street really important to me and Harlem as a very important delta is because it's the culture capital of the black known world, right? Diasporically, if you were to go to different aspects of Harlem, you would see the tapestry of who we are in our complexity, in our nuance, and in our simplicity, right? And I think that when we start to think about the cycle of narrowing the scope of what blackness looks like, Harlem testifies that there is a dexterity to who we are that can't be shrunk into a box. And that dexterity of who we are is the liberatory force of humanity. There is something actually quite powerful in the soulful space when you think about the spirit of Harlem and the magnitude of that spirit. In National Black Theater, we love to talk about how 125th Street is literally on a river, right? And that river is an active transference of energy, of kinetic energy, of indigenous energy, of mother energy, right? And when we think about that nexus of being the culture capital of of black expression, and artistry, I think that there's something really sacred about that. How does Harlem hold the high tide and the low tide of black culture? How does it hold the diasporic of the Latinx black diasporic language, right? When we think about East Harlem and West Harlem, that we are actually having a conversation that is looking past the binary and actually asking us to think of the multiplicities of the different ways in which the threads that we wear are reflections of who we are. And if we can be more honest about that reflection, we can be more courageous actually about that reflection, we might be able to begin to understand that we're more the similar than we are different. I love that you first brought in the muscle man, right? Because I think about, because he's still there, right? He might be there right now working out.
Right now.
He is there right now.
And the truth of him being there right now working out is an expression of that liberatory force that gives the high and the low a sacred space to be seen, not to be judged.
Right.
Thank you, Jonathan. I mean, I think so often, I'm now off the script, but I think really, really often of what I learned from you about the river, right? I mean, and the fact that, there is this river under 125th Street, which I had no idea about. But when I found that out, it made all the sense in the world to me in terms of what it connects, and exactly as you said about the tide, right? But also the kind of incredible dynamism, right, that it creates, under the earth, underneath the streets, right? So I think about, whenever I'm driving on 125th Street, I think about I'm on the river. I really enjoy that part of it. But related to that, now I'm back on the script. Related to that is really about something I want to say here that you all mentioned in your comments that has to do with connection and community, right? So I want us to talk a little bit for the crowd about to expand a little bit on what you were suggesting, Lana, about parading, right? I think about the tradition of parading in Harlem a lot, right? And I looked at, when I was working on my book, I looked at a lot of photography, early 20th century photography from parades, right? I mean, that's like kind of early street photography, right? And these parades are cultural, right? They're political. There were tons of political parades, right, that happened in Harlem. Like we can think of Marcus Garvey. We can think of around the same time there were parades in support of Ethiopian independence, right? There were tons of political parades. And then I also was remembering, right, a few years ago, maybe some of you were at this form of parade. Ebony Noel Golden, in collaboration with the MBT, did this performance on 125th Street that was precisely about freedom, right? It was about moving along the street, bringing that dynamism, and really, really thinking about it. So I want us to say a little bit more about parading, about the streets, right, and about style, right? Help me out.
Well, they keep looking at me. So, let's see. I would like to, think about Wally Thurman. Wallace Thurman was a writer during the Harlem Renaissance. So it's a name you may or may not know. But he was rather prolific in some ways. Yes. He had a house on 136th Street. And this was a house in which many writers gathered. They would have been the younger writers, not the established W.B. Du Bois writers. No, they would be Wally Thurman. He was very somewhat eccentric. He was a very smart man. He read everything, he knew everything, and yet everything was going to be a major disaster in 2 seconds. So he was that sort. So there was a lot of drama with him. But he was the focus for many of the writers, people whose names you would know, like Zora and Langston. They all congregated in his place and sometimes stayed. I bring him up because he wrote a book about Harlem. And it's a small chapbook. In fact, it's out of print, but you can find it on the internet. It's actually there.
Or in the Schomburg.
Oh, the Schomburg, of course. Yeah, of course. But my point is that he talks about, so we're talking about what, the 20s, 1920s, maybe late 20s. And he's talking about what the streets feel to him and what they say to him. He's very disparaging about Fifth Avenue because he doesn't see it as the place to be. Lenox Avenue, he says, oh, well, it's dirty, it's got a lot of bars and cha-cha. But when you get to 7th Avenue, well, now 7th Avenue is another place altogether. And he talks about its chaotic splendor. He talks about in terms of its warmth and its peopledness. 7th Avenue is going to be the avenue in which, if you were to get to 7th Avenue in the 20s and the 30s, you were going to be dressed. No one got to 7th Avenue and you were not dressed. You had to be dressed. So what you need to do is think about Harlem in its, say, Harlem Renaissance time. Let's think about that. And then if we think about that, let's think about all of the clubs that were on 7th Avenue. The other thing you should know is that at this time, in terms of New York City and its transportation, since we're talking about streets, 7th Avenue had double-decker buses, but Lenox Avenue, 8th Avenue, all the other avenues had trolleys. So that left this large, wide boulevard, untrammeled by iron. And as a result, it was wide and broad, and it was the place that people imagined being on our own Champs-Élysées. And it was what Wally Thurman christened as our Black Broadway. Because along here would be all of those clubs some of you have heard about, but it would also be theaters like the Lafayette. Certainly there would be the Renaissance Ballroom, but there were other ballrooms at this time whose names did not manage to surface in the same way. The Dunbar Ballroom, the Congress Ballroom, and there were others. These were places that you would congregate and you would dance. There were many bands. We hear about Cab Calloway or Louis Armstrong or Duke Ellington or Chick Webb or Jimmy Lunsford and Benny Moten, and it goes on. But imagine walking down 7th Avenue and you hear at the clubs, the taxis, and people. Harlem is not spread out the way you think of it as now. It was smaller. And as a result, people lived a little closer together. So the clubs, the restaurants, the bars, the saloons, they were all there. And as a result, there would be a lot of parades. Picture that. Not just the political parades, but there were also a lot of church parades.
That is the one.
Church
that is
parades
the one right there.
continued in Harlem up until, I'm thinking, maybe the late 60s. There were a few. But if you were someone like...
No, we are just amazed at the wisdom and the grace in which you are speaking from.
I'm so sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It is of awe and of gratitude. Thank you so much.
Well, there were many parades, and they were religious parades. When you think about Father Divine, for those of you who knew something about him, they were parades because they, in addition to Marcus Garvey, because what happens when Garvey is deported, many of those followers, if you know your history, you know that Marcus Garvey, in all his flamboyance, also encouraged other people to wear uniforms, and they actually had factories in Harlem. Marcus Garvey had 6 or 7 retail businesses because he believed that you should be able to work and support yourself. And so his parades were not just the feathers and the armor and the uniforms, they were so much more. But when he was deported, where did those thousands of people go? Ah, that's a question. Because they went to people like Father Divine. Why? Because Father Divine also preached economic liberation. And they marched in the street, not quite like, like Marcus Garvey, but they were there. I don't want to hog up all the time, but
Well, you mentioning churches, I mean, that is a history, a tradition that continues even now. I mean, as you find yourself on a Sunday morning walking towards any church in Harlem, and of course, there are more churches in Harlem than anywhere else on this island, as there should be. I mean, it is Harlem. But, as you're walking towards any given church, you will find yourself surrounded by a parade of elegance, of people who are seeking ministry and seeking community. They're doing it through style, but they're also doing it in connection with the heritage. Whether that was a heritage that started in Alabama or Kansas City, it continues here. And whether you're going to Mother Zion or you're going to Abyssinian Baptist Church, where, of course, the great Fats Waller played organ when he was a child, that connection, that parading is always happening. Of course, 125th Street. I
have a little note about church. Maybe this is a good place to say it.
Go ahead.
And this has to do with Isabel Powell. Some of you know Isabel Powell. She was Adam Clayton Powell Jr.'s first wife. And she was a showgirl. She was more than that. She was not quite the Beyonce of her time, but she was up there. So much so that Florence Ziegfeld had her as the prime person in Showboat, but she chose to marry Adam Powell instead. Okay, just telling you a little bit. But one of the things that Belle would say, she says, and this I'm quoting from her now. She says, if Adam had worn a light linen suit the week before, as he's preaching, you see, men in church would say he looked so good, and next week they would all wear white linen suits to church. The other thing that she said was that after church, Adam was also fond of wearing his tails and striped pants. We used to walk down 7th Avenue. I'd be wearing one of my best outfits, walking right beside him on 125th Street, where the building is now named for him. And she said, and we would greet people, and they would greet us. And he said, parishioners and people would tell us what a lovely couple we were. And she said, I was so proud of him, but of course he was also proud of himself.
That's amazing.
What I just want to lean into with uplifting, which I appreciate you uplifting 125th and Freedom, Ebony Noel Golden's piece, and thinking about the theatrics of how we dress. And the theatrics of the storytelling of how we dress. 125th and Freedom, just to tell folks, was a processional that took 5 hours, going from river to river on 125th Street, telling the story of if Harriet Tubman was alive today, how would she free her people? And utilizing the contextual language of clothing as a way to talk about from a dystopic location to a liberatory location. Like, how do we get from taking in East Harlem to West Harlem and the river? And what I just want to lean in as you uplifted that and talking about processional, right, is that it is about going to a destination. It is about actually, it's almost like the promenade, as we ultimately would say. And how do Black people show their promenade? How do they get the opportunity when many are sometimes regulated to different ways of expression? How does the processional, the ritual of the parade, the ritual of showing up allow for the dignity to be restored where it was once actually ripped away? And so the theatrics of the processional, right, the theatrics of 125th and Freedom was an act of actually talking through that process and an active engagement that asked the community, how would you actually join into that liberatory practice? that Harriet Tubman, if we were to imagine that and think of it in clothes or in style or in thread, cannot do that singularly alone. It has to be done in concert with community.
Right.
And in every one of your examples, you're talking about how the concert and the constitution of a community was created out of the idea of showing up in a singular force. And I think that sometimes we miss the concept of how clothes, and how clothes within the Black community is a destination around creating community so that one is not outed or created to be a target, and also is a destination to allow others to come like a flock to build a better future or to build a new frontier for us to gather around. And I think the act of gathering is a radical act. Because the act of gathering for Black folks in particular, especially
Was illegal.
And ever since the impact of slavery becomes a constitutional act for us to find ourselves and to rename what family looks like when it was destroyed amongst the American system of capitalism.
Yeah, yes. Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah.
We often think about dressing as an individual thing. You know, you see somebody on the street and you go, ooh, man. Elegance. But, you know, you're going someplace. Oftentimes the question is, oh, where are you going?
Right.
Because you can't just be dressing this way just because. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you do.
Sometimes you do.
Sometimes you do.
Sometimes you do.
But often it's in anticipation of that community.
Right.
And that's where that second level of resonance, beyond the thread, but with each other, actually happens.
Yeah. So, Dandy, I want to ask you then, right? I want to ask you about your personal style, right? And its relationship to this idea, right? To this idea of, to an idea of both selfhood and community, right? One of the ways that I like to think about, or that I do think about, dandyism, right, is that it is a really expansive practice, and that sometimes people dress up, show out for themselves. Like, it is an act that happens between somebody and a mirror, right? Sometimes people dress up, show out, right, for a very limited, right, audience, right, of, I don't know, family, friends, loved ones, right? I mean, something that is like a, you know, a sort of more intimate celebration. Sometimes that act comes, and we saw some examples of that, what I was talking before. Sometimes that showing up is overtly political, right, and meant to be seen, right, by other people for a particular purpose, right, or you know, to send a particular kind of message, right. I'm thinking of that linen suit, right. So I want to know a little bit about the origin of your personal style, and what are the contours, right, of how you got there.
Well, I thank you for the question. My personal style would be nothing without my mother. It starts with my mother.
Okay.
It's in the films that she showed me, the music that was playing in our house, the Beardens that were on the wall. It's the culture of Harlem, and it's also lineage. Her mother was a seamstress, the kind of person who could look at a garment and create a pattern from it.
Yeah.
Not even if that garment wasn't in front of her, that she could touch it, even if it was just a photo or an illustration of that garment. My grandfather in Jamaica always wore a suit. Even in that Jamaican heat, always wore
It was
a suit.
linen. It was linen.
It might have been linen.
Okay. Well,
Could have been the queen's
hope it was
wool.
linen.
You know what I mean?
Let's hope it was linen. Yes.
But so, you know, there is for me that lineage and that connection. But and of course, as a band leader, as someone who connects with jazz, who plays music from the 1920s and 30s. And I try to be like Lana and always digging in the stacks for the deep cuts and those tunes that are not always played. But as I started to move forward in my life and continue with this style and continue to evolve it, talking about church, the first time I saw a detachable collar on a gentleman in person was in church. Was one of the deacons. He had a little wax mustache, and I was like, okay, bro,
Yeah.
Taking notes.
Well done.
Taking notes.
Yeah.
But the community element of it, the communal element of it was always there in that I had a very a strong community of women that helped raise me. I mean, I've known Lana
I know.
all
I know
my
this.
life.
I know
All
this.
my life.
Yes.
But one thing that I've always wanted, dressing in this way, I mean, I'm wearing, this is a double-breasted waistcoat. That's like, it's, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's to embody our history, right, but not want to go back.
Right.
Vintage style, not vintage values,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That is how I see the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it also is to remind whoever might be around me of our brilliance, of our history. Not that I am necessarily brilliant, but at least I can put it on a little bit and remind you of it, right? Remind myself of it.
Right.
And, give people an option about what style could be for them.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Following on with that, right? I mean, I think so much about, one of the ways that I was thinking about this panel was like, theatrics, theater, music, right, and dance, right? So I want to ask a little bit about Lana, a little bit about dance, right? And okay, maybe we can dance a little bit later. But I want to ask a little bit about sort of dance and your relationship to that history in Harlem, because I feel like that it's so connected from what I know, right, about your own history. It's so connected to your style, right, and also to your family history. So tell me a little bit about dance, right, and how that fits in for you.
Well, that's interesting because it does factor in greatly in my life. I'm not sure that it did as I was younger, but the seeds were always there. My father, I would credit largely for music and for stories. Now, of course, if he were here, he would be a little surprised to hear me say that because he doesn't remember telling me any stories. But stories are told sometimes in silence. And stories are also told just because you're doing things and someone's watching you. There are stories. I paid attention to the things that he loved. My father was not a talker. He was someone who had thoughts in his mind, and every now and then he would say something that would be, rather profound. He didn't say much, but when he did say something, it was always pretty clear. My father was someone who always cut what I call a dashing figure. He always wore a Stetson hat. He wore a suit all the time, a tie. He had polished shoes. And his deportment was one that you thought perhaps he was going to run some major office. But in fact, he was a chauffeur. And while that might suggest a kind of uniform, actually, it was really my father. That was who he was. And so all the things that came with the elegance of this man, who I could only see and just watch and occasionally speak to, would be the things that were of interest to him. And what was interesting to him? A quiet conversation, thoughtful ideas, but there was always the music. And it wasn't that he had it on all the time, but he had these records, these albums that I would be so curious about. And I'm one of 6, I'm the oldest. And so when everyone would leave the house, I would select the music, I'd put it on, and just listen with such glee and with such, I think, intense humor over the fact that I could do this by myself. My father was one who did inhabit the Savoy Ballroom and other places. They came from the South on the wave of the Great Migration, in 1937, and they came with jobs. So, of course, you know it was a depression, and people were not faring well. But he and my mother worked for people like the Whitneys and for others who were, you know, fairly well named. But so they had the ability to have money and to have some things. Not a lot, but just enough. In the evenings, you know those photographs that you can thumb through in books, and they're all black and white, and people are sitting around a table with their setups, and they're all looking so grand and beautiful. Well, in the evenings, they would get dressed for going out to the clubs in Harlem. And they would be very much a part of the big bands and the small clubs and just getting together at the fine restaurants where they could sit back and be held in communion in all of their finery. They belonged to clubs like the Dukes and Duchesses. Oh, but of course, there's always aspiration. And there's always Duke Ellington to follow behind. So it would be music. And when I was little, my father, when he would come home, he would allow me to stand on his shoes and he would show me how to dance. Oh, if you were 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, that was the whole world right there. And so it would be later that I would spend time, not at the Savoy Ballroom by the time I became of age, that was sadly gone. But he had a good time there. He had a good time at the Rennie on 7th Avenue. He would go to the Alhambra. But there were many places one could dance and have a grand time because there were thousands of social clubs. And they were always giving dances and they were always getting dressed. But if I think about the Savoy Ballroom, it was the only interracial place in all of New York City to dance in 1926 and thereafter. It was where celebrities, movie stars came up to Harlem regularly. No one asked you for your autograph. They only wanted to know, could you dance?
Yes.
It was all they were interested in.
Right.
The Savoy Ballroom was on Lenox Avenue between 140th and 141st. It held 4,000 people. So think about that, and think about black people in general. Think about when you get here and you can do something, wouldn't you top yourself the next week and the next day and the next day? Oh, but of course you would. So we would get Norma Miller, who was a great Lindy Hop dancer, or Frankie Manning, who was a fantastic Lindy Hop dancer and became the ambassador, and so many more people. But the music and the dancing, they were the bridge to a lot of culture. County Cullen wrote a poem.
Right.
There were any number of paintings. There were people like Ellington who wrote a tune in tribute to Florence Mills, singer
Black
and
Beauty.
dancer, exactly. And there were other musicians who also wrote music for dancers and for artists. So would it not want to follow in those footsteps? Wouldn't you, learn how to swing, have as much fun as I?
Yes.
I love it, and so would you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. No, I mean, what you say there, Lana, is so, I mean, about the importance of the ballroom being, first of all, just an incredibly, spacious place. There are tons of people, but also this brings us back to something that Jonathan mentioned before, which is really about diversity and nuance, right, and dexterity. So I want to think with you, Jonathan, a little bit about, and this might be our last moment before we're on questions. I know, isn't it amazing? I want to think a little bit with you, Jonathan, about, like I said, you sort of introduced me to the river, right? But the other thing that NBT brought to me, and that, when I'm in Morningside Heights and I'm thinking about Harlem, which is all the time, right? I mean, especially when I'm teaching, right, is I think about NBT as a kind of vessel, right, for for how kind of Afro-diasporic consciousness feels, right? And, you know, when you introduced me to that space and when I was able to bring my students into that space, I just see it as a kind of portal. So I want to think with you a little bit about portals, right? And how Harlem is a portal for some of the things that we've been talking about tonight, right? In terms of style and spirit and dynamism and movement. And in some ways, like the whole time you've all been talking, I've also been thinking about, you know, the way that some of the clothing that I showed here and that will also be in the exhibition really is built around and meant to, right, enable actual movement, but also metaphoric, right, and spiritual movement. So, Jonathan.
Hi, that's a big question.
I know it is. I know it is. You can handle it.
I first want to have to uplift the founder of National Black Theater, Dr. Barbara Antier, who helped to create the initial portal.
Right.
And then also have to uplift her daughter, who's
Sade.
the CEO of National Black Theater, Sade Lithcott, who
Absolutely.
kept the baton going. That between these two dynamic black women, there would be a birthing channel. That there would be an opportunity for us to see the connective tissue of our own reflection, but also a space where we can see our humanity through the vessel of Black liberation.
Right.
And what I mean when I think about the idea of generating portals, I also think about how are we actually being dedicated to protecting ourselves, right?
Right.
And when I think about clothing, I think about the way that we've been talking about clothing. Something that's been showing up for me is that, like, what am I how I actually dress every single day, right? Like, people say, "Oh, your nails look lovely," and I say, "Well, I paint my nails this way because I want to have the universe at my fingertips." So I want to be able to, when things get rough or get tough, I look at my fingers. I'm like, "Oh, the universe has access," right? When I think about the pearls that I'm wearing, they're my grandmother's pearls, right? So that I'm creating portals.
Right.
We're creating portals in the destination of the intentionality of how we show up.
Right.
And the ways in which that we adorn ourselves with our crown, and the way in which that we ground ourselves into Mother Earth's power, right? When we think about the river itself,
Yes.
and the way in which we see ourselves as a tuning fork to be a reflection of the brilliance that's housed within, right? So if someone actually sits at the center and understands themselves as an apex, right? So I'm holding my grandmother close to me. I'm holding a lot of vintage jewelry close to me. I'm holding a warrior shaman on to me, right? Because what I have to do when I walk out of my door is feel the apex of me channeling all that energy into my breath.
Yeah.
So that when I speak, the articulation of myself is the vortex of all of that wisdom wrapped in my tongue, voiced out in the way I speak, and then also representation of my authenticity. And that my integrity is attached to that. So when I think, so to answer your question around portals, right? The individual, each of us are individual portals to wisdom. And the more and more that we attach ourselves to understand the unique vibrations that who we are, the butterfly, you know, it was really beautiful, actually. I'm going on a tangent. Apology, everyone. I will be quiet soon. But when we think about the mechanism, Pastor Michael A. Warren at First Corinthian Baptist Church uplifted this notion of what's so fascinating about caterpillars is that they're unrealized butterflies. And that housed inside of them is the wisdom to become a butterfly that they will always fight up against. And then at some point they have to go into a cocoon and they'll become something so beautiful that they don't even get to see, but we get to appreciate. And so on some level, I wonder in which ways are we not actually taking care of the wisdom inside ourselves, allowing ourselves to go into a cocoon, shift and morph and become something that we will never probably ever get to fully see the brilliance of, but the world will reckon with. Because a butterfly can shift the very molecular structure of our weather. It pollinates and creates possibility of food, and it actually gives beauty whenever it goes, grace shows up when a butterfly shows up. We pause when we see that. So when I think about, when you're asking about portals, and we're asking about this very important nexus that we're in society-wise, right? And we think about the ways in which we have to create protection to be, I think, radically soft in a brittle world that wants us to be hard. My question is, how are you first addressing the vessel that is you to allow that to be soft in the presence of others so that your humanity can then show up, and then we can build a world, I believe, that is more feminine than masculine, that allows for the softness of that birthing channel, the softness of that creation channel, the softness of that mother energy to show up right here, right now, because the world has been built masculine. And we have seen the decimation, the conflict, the hurt that shows up when a masculine world is present. And I wonder what will happen if we turn to a femme.
Okay.
For president.
So now I think we have to move to questions. Happy to hear questions. Sherry. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you for that very rich discussion. Also, just to note, I have someone's
Oh, my glasses, those are mine.
I got you.
Thank you, thank you.
We actually have several questions online. We will not be able to get through them all, but we'll have a good selection. And the first, I can answer myself. The exhibition opens May 10th and will be on view through October 26th at Met Fifth Avenue, so make your plans. All right, so a question for the group. How does contemporary Harlem influence your own fashion?
Contemporary Harlem is an echo of the past, but also a portal to the future. It is potential, you know. The same way we were talking about shoes at one point. The same way that I got to make sure that my shoes are right, those Timbs are right outside. You know, those ones are right. That legacy that continues, right? The next great fashion designer, the next great dramaturge is here in Harlem. You know? Yes, we can talk about CEOs and sure. But I'm talking about the creators are in Harlem, right? So I'm always inspired by Harlem.
I would just uplift and say that, like, Harlem inspires my style because there's a saying that Sade Lithcott at NBT says that actually I believe is so important. Home is where your exhale feels the best. And when I came to Harlem, I got to exhale. So therefore, and no matter my ability to absorb, my ability to be in relationship with my own self becomes different, which then allows for me to absorb this, like on this stage, honestly, when you look at this gorgeous gown that is on this beautiful woman, when you look at this suit that is stitched to the nine, right? When you look at this, you're inspired. I want to be bolder in my color. I want to now be, and my exhale that feels like home allows for me to radically live inside of me and be bold inside my own choice.
For me, it's about church. And you know, it really doesn't matter whether you go or not, but that if you're out on the street on Sunday morning, I think you should pay a little bit of attention. So church to me is a bastion of theater. And you see choirs in swaying robes, deacons in Sunday suits, ushers in crisp uniforms, nurses in crimson, blue, navy capes, and church ladies for whom no single color from head to toe, depending on if it's Women's Day now, would be the same color from hat to bag to shoes.
100%.
To please each other and, of course, the Almighty on a Sunday. Well, they pull it together and they make it work. And they step out and they love themselves and they love each other with humor and affection. It was these African American tastemakers who really become a subtle and an impressionable influence on me. Because for me, carriage was language. Color found purpose. Clothes danced.
Thank you.
Monica, this might be a question for you to field first.
Okay.
How is this exhibition in conversation with this existence within a museum setting? And how does that context shape the approach the curators took to displaying these pieces and histories to visitors who may otherwise be encountering Black culture for the first time?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. It sort of takes us out of the spirit, but that's okay. It's in the spirit. Okay. So I would say that, you know, we thought really hard, right, about how to bring people, the largest possible audience, into this history and into this conversation about Black style through the particular lens of dandyism. And I'm going to say we took a number of approaches, right? One of them has to do with the categorization that I was talking about before, like thinking about thematic ideas, right? That could be entered into, right? To think about respectability. I think that's something that everybody understands, right? To think about, we have another section that I didn't talk about tonight that's called beauty, right? To think about what that could mean, what it looks like. Right, to think about the history of that, you know, specifically within the Black community, but also a history and an idea, right, that I think is open to everyone. So we were really looking to do that, but it's also, there's a very intentional historical frame that the exhibition has, as well as a thematic frame, right? And in particular, the way that we are displaying historic garments. That was really inspired by conversations that we had with the exhibition designer, Torquazi Dyson, who was really sensitive and helped us to be incredibly sensitive about how we will display, in particular, garments that were either worn by or made by enslaved people. So the exhibition design, right, as well as the ways in which we are mounting garments onto mannequins or what we call invisible mounts, right? The ways in which we're doing all of that is really meant to sort of bring people into the exhibition in a way that is as open as possible, is meant to teach in some ways, you know, a version of Black history, right, through fashion, but is also meant to be at many different moments familiar to everyone, right? So we tried to do a lot of things at once. Thankfully, the exhibition is large, right? so there's space, right, to get a lot done, right? But yeah, it was really a lot of the kind of collaborative talks that we had with the people that we worked with on the exhibition, as well as, you know, curatorial team, were really, really important in that process.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
What was the most difficult piece to source for the exhibition? And was there a piece that got away?
Oh my goodness. The most difficult piece is the piece that we don't have, right? Because it's not there, right? The most difficult piece. I don't know if I can talk about that without telling on anybody. I'm going to say that and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, I'm just, I'm going to say, I don't know about difficulty, but I would say that what was hard, what was challenging, right? In terms of the historical sweep that we're trying to get across. What's challenging about that, if we're starting in the 18th century and bringing it up to yesterday, the challenge there are all of the garments in the earlier part of the show, right? So again, garments that would have been made by or worn by enslaved people. Those are really rare, right? Because for all kinds of reasons, right? In particular because they were not seen as valuable, right? And they were often they were not made of superfine wool, right? For the most part, right? They were made from what was called Negro cloth, right? Which disintegrates. So I think some of those early garments were really difficult. I mean, again, I already talked about how important it was for us to care for them and how we are caring for them, I hope, very responsibly and respectfully.
Thank you. So this person phrases this question thinking about how their grandfather never went to town without being dressed. Mm-hmm. They ask, thinking about how style is a tool for community and respect for self and others, mm-hmm. What do you think we lose in the age of disposable / fast fashion? Mm. Looks like Jonathan has a...
What? I will jump in. What I think we lose in the age of disposable fast fashion is the kind of specialized detail, refined longevity, and also the crystallization of personality that I think shows up when you find something that's tailored, something that is thought of, something that is handmade, something that is, to create something is to pray over it, right? And when fast fashion is created, the hands are not the ones that are blessing it, a machine is. And so I just wonder, I think that that's something that we lose. That detail of when I'm holding something that was handmade, you can feel the presence of the individual, and you can feel the messages that the individual is actually potentially blessing on top of you. And so I think that you lose that, and I think that's a very important thing not to miss, but to want to hold.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something there? I agree, right? But I also want us to think about experimentation. Right? I mean, one of the things that fashion and clothing does, and that I also think when the earlier question about contemporary fashion in Harlem, one of the things that I think also that I see, right, and that I really enjoy about street fashion in general, but in particularly in Harlem, is the incredible variety of ways that people are expressing themselves with clothing and fashion. Sometimes that is tailored, bespoke, vintage, thoughtful, prayed over, and sometimes it's somebody trying something new, right? Trying something new, experimenting, like showing an aspect of themselves, right? That maybe they're not going to invest in right in that moment, right? But might invest in the future. So I want to just kind of keep it open, because I also really love to see. Right, because when you see somebody like totally dressed to the nines, that's one like, hey you, right? But then when you see somebody just like with an outrageous something, right? Or just, sometimes it's like a different effect, right? And I just want to make sure that we're appreciating that too. Yeah.
Fast fashion, it's important to acknowledge that fast fashion exists because of its accessibility.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so many of us don't have, because of this capitalist system that we live in, we don't have the access that we should to the things, to the services, but also to the things that fill us with joy. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that fast fashion is a quick thing to grab, but there are many who can take that thing, that garment, that sweater, and create something new with it.
Exactly.
Not just by putting it on, but by doing what Black people have always done, by remixing, right? By sampling and, you know,
exactly
transmogrifying
right. Yeah.
these items.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And keeping an eye on time, that was our last question. I do want to say and acknowledge there were several questions that we just didn't get to, but I want to emphasize Heidi's introduction and to remind you that there will be many, many, many opportunities through programming and events at the Met and off-site locations to engage with our experts, our curators, our collaborators. So please keep an eye on our website, show up at the Met, show up wherever we are. We'll come find you in a non-threatening way and bring your questions and your curiosity because that's what we embrace. And we're so thankful for everyone for coming out tonight, for the folks who didn't get blown away by the wind. And hopefully we'll see you around Harlem and we'll see you in Brooklyn and we'll see you at the Met. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Harlem.
Thank you.